With PSA grading fees continuing to climb, turnaround times continuing to slip, a lot of card graders are starting to get frustrated, and the logical question many of them are asking is, does it make sense to abandon PSA and look to one of the other faster and cheaper options for grading cards? Now, this isn't the first time the grading market has gone through something like this. Years ago, it was BGS, not PSA, who owned the grading market. But then their turnarounds, their pricing, and their customer service all got notably worse, and it was around that time that PSA's values on the secondary market started pulling away. So for those of us who were grading for profit back then, it became a no-brainer to switch to PSA. Now, the important thing is that that decision was not based on feelings. It was based on the actual numbers. And as someone who's graded thousands of cards over the years, the thing that I would recommend is doing the same thing here to make your decision a little bit easier. So instead of using your feelings to decide if it's time to move away from PSA, let's look at the actual numbers. And that's exactly what we're going to walk through in this video. So here's how we're going to break this down. We're going to take the 2023 Victor Wembanyama Panini Prism rookie card and model out what it looks like to send 10 copies to 3 different grading companies as many times as we can over a year, based on their turnaround times and their grading fees. And that way we'll be able to see which one actually makes us the most money. Now, for context, we're going to look at the cheapest turnaround times for each of the grading companies. So right now, PSA is $25 per card for a 95 business day turnaround. BGS is $18 per card for a 75 business day turnaround. And SGC is $15 per card for about a 50-day turnaround. So since we're sending 10 cards to each company, we can just multiply those numbers by 10, and we know that we have $250 in grading fees from PSA, $180 in grading fees from BGS, and $150 in grading fees from SGC for each submission that we send in. So right now, the Wemby Prism rookie card sells for about $45 a piece. So if we're looking at sending 10 of those, we know that we're going to have an additional $450 of costs for each grading submission. Now, keep in mind, things like sales tax and shipping fees are real costs that we have to consider. But for the sake of this model, I'm keeping this as simple and clean as possible, and I'm not including those today. Now, based on recent sales, here's what the value of each grade looks like. So PSA 10s are worth about $275, PSA 9s are worth $63, SGC 10s are worth $151, SGC 9.5s are worth $75, SGC 9s are worth $40, BGS 9.5s are worth $183, and BGS 9s are worth $52. Keep in mind that a PSA 10 is equal to an SGC 10 is equal to a BGS 9.5 in the sense that these are all gem mint grades for each respective grading company. Now, we're also going to assume that we get roughly the same grades for each grading company. So for PSA, we're going to say we get 6 PSA 10s for every submission and 4 PSA 9s, a reasonable 60% gem rate, which is close to what this card has historically graded at. For BGS, we're going to say 6 BGS 9.5s and 4 BGS 9s. And for SGC, we're going to say 6 SGC 10s, 2 SGC 9.5s, and 2 SGC 9s. And I also want to acknowledge there are other companies out there, like CGC and TAG are companies that do more in the Pokemon and the TCG market. But when it comes to the sports card market, they just don't have the demand or liquidity for me to reliably model their data. So here's how the numbers break down for each submission. The total value of the PSA submission is going to be $1,902. Our total cost for PSA submissions are $700 for each sub, and the profit here is $1,202 per submission. For BGS, the total value of each sub is $1,306, the total cost is $630, and the total profit per sub is $676. For SGC, the total value is $1,136 per submission, total cost per sub is $600, and the total profit per submission is $536. So this is the same cards. We're getting roughly the same grade distribution for each given their models, but you can see the dramatic difference in value on the secondary market based on PSA's brand appeal. So based on card values alone, it's really not even close, but that's only part of the equation. Here's where things get interesting. So we have to look at the grading turnaround times, and we have to consider how many submissions can we actually make in a given year with the same money. Now, it's worth mentioning that you can send as many grading submissions as you want throughout the year, so there are no limits if you want to spend different money. But for the sake of this model, we're using these same dollars for every single sub, so we can't get to submission number 2 until we get submission number 1 back and sell those cards. So here's what that looks like, and where BGS and SGC close the gap a little bit, because PSA's turnaround time is 95 business business days. BGS, once again, is 75 business days, and SGC is 50 business days. So the argument starts to shift a little bit here, because while you're going to make more money with PSA, it's going to take longer for you to get those submissions back compared to the other grading companies. So let's model this out. So what happens over the course of a full year? Now, to keep this realistic, I'm going to add in 10 business days between submissions, because remember, we do have to get the cards back, we have to sell them, and then we have to go rebuy more cards for that next submission, which may not even be possible in 10 business days, but we're going to keep this tight for the sake of this experiment. And so what does that mean as far as how many grading cycles you can get through per year for each grading company? Well, for PSA, you only get through 2 cycles per year. For BGS, it's 3, and for SGC, with a little bit of a faster turnaround time, it's 4 submissions that you can make throughout the year. Now, if we multiply the profit per submission by the number of grading cycles we can get through in a year, here's what it looks like. So the annual profit for PSA is $2,404. For SGC is $2,144, and for BGS is $2,028. So even if you're using BGS or SGC to go faster, PSA still actually makes you more money. And the thing that you got to remember is you also have to do more work with BGS and SGC if you're doing more submissions. So that means being able to source more cards. That means being able to actually sell the cards that you've got. And that's a big part of this too, because when you look at the actual liquidity on the secondary market, there are lots of people looking to buy PSA graded copies of this card. The volume and the liquidity just isn't there when you look at BGS and SGC and the number of times those cards have sold over the past couple of years. So at the end of the day, if your goal is to maximize the value of your cards through the grading process, PSA still remains the best option based on the actual math. Now, I get it, the grading turnaround times really do suck right now, but we're also not powerless. So there are 3 things we can do here to deal with the longer turnaround times. The first one is to target higher upside cards for grading. For example, there are cards out there that sell for $50 raw and they sell for $100 as a PSA 10. There are also cards out there that sell for $50 raw that sell for $200. It takes the same amount of time to find those, they cost the same amount of money, the same grading fee, but one of them you just end up making way more money on the back end. This is one of the biggest unlocks in the grading game because you're just going to be able to go so much faster. The second thing I'm doing is closely related, but when you do find higher upside cards to target for grading, you can generally justify spending a little bit more on the grading fee to get into one of those faster turnaround times. And that way you get your cards back way quicker and you can turn your cards over and get to that next submission even faster. So instead of 2 grading submissions, you might get 3 or 4, depending on which turnaround you go with. And the third way to combat the long turnaround times is just staying consistent. So all too often I see people send 1 submission off and then they're like, man, I just can't make any money at this thing because PSA is taking too long. Yeah, you sent 1 submission. How do you expect to actually create some consistent cash flow if you're sending 1 order off and then just stopping and waiting for 5 months? So what I recommend and what I teach inside my membership program is to submit at least 1 grading order per month. So that means that you're doing a little bit of a sprint up front before you start getting the results back. And it is going to take some work to get this off the ground, but then once the orders start coming back, then you all of a sudden have an order coming back each month. So you get this regular cash flow working for you. If you send 1 grading order and then you just wait, you're just going to have these long gaps and you're never going to build any momentum. But if you send 1 grading order each month, even if it's not that many cards, you just start to get in the flow of having regular orders coming back once you get 3, 4, 5, 6 months down the road from now. And it takes a little bit of planning to think about not what's popular today, but what's going to be popular when your cards come back. But once you put in the work to get this started, that's when these long turnaround times stop mattering quite as much. Now, hopefully PSA gets their act together and gets these turnaround times back under control. But even if they don't, you can absolutely still win with grading. It's still the most consistent way to win in the sports card market because you control what you submit and when you submit it. If this was helpful at all, I post card strategy videos all the time, so make sure you're subscribed. We'll see you on the next one.